And I think we're really going to enjoy, ladies and gentlemen, this morning hearing from John Phipps.
I appreciate this opportunity to speak to you. When Katie contacted me, we had a telephone conversation, and she talked about, well, this summit, and explained it to me, and I said I'd love to do that. That's exactly the kind of meeting that I wish we had more of. And to be a part of that is distinctly a pleasure. And I want to also thank everyone involved, but especially the governor, for the hospitality last night. That was a wonderful chance to talk with people and get some sense of what's going on in your part of the world. For those of you who are interested, I'll give you a crop report from East Central Illinois. It ain't good. That's kind of the short version, and it's not going to get any better. We are now right in the middle of pollination and heading into triple-digit territory. Indiana's probably the worst. Indiana's kind of the epicenter of where the drought's occurring, and it's accumulation of 4 to 5 months of below normal rainfall. Illinois is rapidly approaching the same stage. Take a look at the crop rating index next Monday, and I think you'll get some sense of how rapidly the crop's going downhill. I was talking to a cattleman yesterday, and he says, so you're saying sell the calves now? And I'm going, well, you know, I'm not a market advisor, but I just thought I'd give you an update of what I'm keeping on my mind. When Katie asked me to speak, I said, well, what could I do to help? And I told her about some things. She said, well, why don't you talk about ag policy? And I said, sure, that's a pretty narrow topic. We can narrow that down, and we'll just go from there. And I started to work and started to research on this because, granted, we're right in the middle of the grueling exercise we call a farm bill, and that's a microcosm of what we're trying to deal with. And the more I researched and the more I worked on this, the more it dawned on me, why is this so hard? Why is it so hard for us as a country or even as a state to come up with an ag policy that seems to fit the circumstances and satisfies all the people involved? And that's when it started dawning on me that it really was about more than specific laws or specific regulations or even what certain groups wanted. There are some fundamental issues dealing with how we regulate and how we act together as a culture and a society. So I came up, well, before I proceed any further, I appreciate it in the introduction. It was pointed out that I write humor for Farm Journal. I write commentary, the back page, for Top Producer, which goes to the largest operators. I've noticed in the last 4 or 5 years from my speaking that people are having trouble telling the difference between the two. So if I say something that you think is funny, please feel free to laugh. I may have been going there, and I'll take a pity laugh at that point. The other thing that's important to remember is that I am an engineer. I'm a chemical engineer by training. My sons are engineers, both of them. They married engineers. There's some concern about mapping our genome to find out exactly what went wrong, but somewhere along the line, when we sit down as a family to talk about our farm and our future, 5 out of 6 of us are sitting there with engineering degrees, and eventually the conversation dies off and we're all just emailing spreadsheets back and forth. Laugh if you want, but we get a lot done in a short time. It works out well. Because of that, I will come at this problem slightly differently than many people would, many leaders in agriculture would, just because engineers are far more concerned with making things better than they are in what is deemed to be right and wrong. This has been a flaw in my ability to understand what's going on, and you'll see this later on. In the research that I did for this preparation, or for preparing for this speech, helped me immensely understand what it is I'm talking about every week on U.S. Farm Report or writing about in the magazines, and I appreciate the opportunity to be prompted, be urged to do that. One other thing is the first speaker of the day. It's kind of gone out of fashion, but people will often still make remarks about cell phones. I don't do that anymore. And the reason is simple. When smartphones first came out, well, actually the BlackBerry first came out, and people could get email on the phone. I had never seen one. I spoke to a NAMA meeting, that's National Agri-Marketers Association, And these guys are, they're grafted on to their communication device. It's just embedded in their personality. Salesmen are like that. And I looked out at the audience at one point, and at least half the audience was sitting there. They're sitting there at tables, and they had their hands folded and their heads down, and God help me, I thought they were praying for me. I really did. I did not realize they were sitting there texting away furiously. And I mentioned that at the time. I said, this is very touching, and I appreciate the support. Of course, everybody immediately puts them away and all embarrassed. But seriously, I'd never seen one. So actually, I don't mind if you're texting somebody or emailing somebody, because from up here, it looks like you're really on my side. Oh, Lord, help this guy out. He needs all the help he can get. So if I do have one rule, though. If you had your ringtone programmed by a grandson or granddaughter, you're the people who need to shut it off right now. There are two reasons. You probably ended up with a ringtone. You have no idea what it is. It may be, Eminem. You don't know. Just something like that. But I had this elder gentleman sitting in the middle of a speech, and I was out in Kansas. And sure enough, his phone went off. Now, because, like many of us farmers, and I'm in this category, we ruined our hearing very early on by sitting on open tractors, WD-45 for me, with just enormous decibel levels. Well, many times we have our volume on our ringtone set right up there toward the top end. So this thing, when it went off, and it's blaring away, and the guy can't remember what pocket he's got it in. And so he's searching around like this, and we're all finally just stopped. Everybody just centered watching this poor guy. He doesn't realize. He finds it, and this wasn't the part that got me. That I can understand. Up till then, that's okay. But he pulls the phone out. What does he do? He checks to see who it is. He doesn't turn it off. He sees who's calling. And then, I'm not making this up, he answered it. Yeah? And of course, he's talking just as loud as he needs to for him to hear. And then it dawned on him that it had gone very quiet. I was flummoxed. I didn't know. I was just standing here watching him. And so he became embarrassed. And God help me, he pulled his jacket up over his head and kind of leaned over and kept talking. It was though, if I can't see you, you can't see me. So that's the rule. If you didn't program your own ringtone, you are required to shut it off right now. It's like the plane taking off. I would also like to introduce the remote control. Stand up and take a bow, dear. We will be using a very personalized form of computer technology here, in that the remote control didn't make it here. So, and for the later speakers, this is what you can look forward to. So, why is farm policy so hard? Ag policy, I have come up with a theory. That's my job. Modest theory. So if you would, my dear, here it is. First off, ag is more complicated than we say it is. How many of you, there are some producers in the room, how many of you guys have a newer tractor, and all of us have been spending money like drunken sailors on new equipment, and it broke down, and you went to do something, and the only clue you had was error code M82, right? And so you you were standing there with your crescent wrench in one hand, the pliers in the other, because that's carried you through your repair career until now. That's not working anymore. You have no clue what's going on. You call the guy in the little truck. We have developed an industry with such sophisticated tools and technologies. We are adopting methodologies from other industries to the point that, for the most of us, we're just struggling to keep up with the complexity of our own industry. And yet, we know how powerfully the image of a simple, straightforward, farming-type picture resonates with the American public, And so that's still what we don't show is the guy sitting there with a laptop in the cab of the tractor trying to diagnose a problem. We show lambs and kittens and a farm scene and silos. That's amazing to me. We still put silos on our checks. And we're tearing them down as fast as we can in the Midwest, but we still put the silos and windmills on our checks. I have no idea what that is. But the icons we choose tell us something about the picture that we think we ought to be broadcasting. In the meantime, we are causing what's called cognitive dissonance because that's not what our world is like. Ag is very complicated. But, and I say this, and this is a generalization on my part, I think it's still marginally simpler than the rest of the world. The problem is, the rest of the world is starting to invade our farm more often and more intensely. In other words, we've just gone through 6 months, and on the U.S. Farm Report every week, for those of you who watch it, we have 2 market experts, and they sit down with Al Pell, and they talk about the markets. And we've been getting constant emails. And they say, why do you keep talking about Greece all the time? I mean, I don't care about Greece and the euro. And yet, that's all these guys can talk about. Well, we've moved on from that. Greece is now on number 2 and weather's number 1. But nonetheless, they hadn't caught on to the fact that that's how the world reaches in and down to my farm and now to your ranch or your farm. That suddenly it matters what's going on in Europe. It matters what Greece and Germany are trying to get done. It matters what happens to Spain. It matters what happens in Africa, believe it or not. By the way, if any of you have been following the problem with the Eurozone and feel like you have the answer, for God's sake, call Angela Merkel immediately, because they don't have a clue over there. And that's the truth, and they know it. So we're stumbling around in the dark. So all of you experts, money economists, please call them up and help them out. Now, skip the next slide and go 2 slides, please. The problem with complexity, no, skip that one. I realize this thing is going to run way too long, so I'm going to try to cut some. This is one of my favorite quotes from H.L. Mencken, and here's the problem. We run into complex problems. We have to deal with complex problems every day, and boy, our minds really want. They really, really want to come up with the simple, straightforward solution, something that's just very clean. We'll just make a law that does this. Three words. You can't do this anymore, or something like that. And what we're finding out is that these are illusions, that the idea that we're going to craft policy to handle this degree of complexity, well, you saw what happened in the Senate version of the Farm Bill. It came in at about 1,100 pages. Now, the reason I say that is there's been just an enormous amount of skepticism and scorn about the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare, or whatever title you used to use, and it was like 2,100 pages. It was a fundamental reform of a huge part of the system, of our economic system, and I thought, well, it's kind of interesting that the Farm Bill is half the size. It is. It's enormous. Now we're piling amendments into it. Who knows? By the time we get done with the House version and they go through conference committee, it could end up with something rivaling at least the weight in paper alone. And so if you ask yourself, they're always coming up with these terribly complex problems or terribly complex solutions, that's because the problems are really, really hard and very complex. We have created a system whereby we're so interlinked and so rapidly interlinked that it's very difficult to manage or regulate it. But I'm here to help. And here's what this engineer recommends. When you're dealing with complexity, if you would, dear, I'm sorry, I apologize. I say that because I'm 64 and you look like my granddaughter. I should not refer to you as dear. That's disrespectful. So I'll just say lady. Do that. I'm an old guy. I haven't gotten politically correct fast enough, so I apologize. That's just the way we'll struggle through this. Okay, This really burns me up. The trouble with agriculture is that we have a fondness of making up our own numbers. Even if they're better numbers, people, in-house numbers don't help you when you're dealing with people outside the house. You've got to have impartial numbers. You've got to have what I call real numbers. Where do real numbers come from? They come from people whose job it is to generate real numbers, not from people who have an interest in the real numbers. In other words, we're not spending nearly enough time going to the BEA.gov or BLS or census.gov and looking at real numbers. These real numbers help you make better decisions. For example, let me just give you a quick quiz. You guys didn't know this, but there's going to be a pop quiz here. How many of you, could anybody guess, and there's no points for being wrong here, what the size of the gross domestic product is for the United States? The big kahuna. If you can come within a few trillion, I'll give you big points here. Oh, cheater. You got the wise guy in the front row. Yeah, exactly. It's 14.4, I think, something like that. Now, please. What part of that belongs to agriculture? And interestingly enough, this percentage has not varied for 50 years. We have been at 1% of gross domestic product. This is a figure I have never seen in any ag publication or at any meeting. And yet, it is the most basic understanding of our economy. Here's how it breaks down. Ag FF, we're lumped in with forests and fisheries. Don't ask me why. This is the Department of Commerce. This is how they break things out. And it turns out that ag is about 1%. And it has been for a long time. What's the fastest growing segment? Fire. It's not really fire. It's not fire departments. That's finance, insurance, real estate. They pile those together, and that's one category. That's rapidly becoming a huge part. Well, it's up to 20%. 10 years ago, it was below 10. America makes money by fooling around with money. Okay? This is GDP. Now, here's the quiz part. There's also calculated the gross state product for states. And I'll give you the answer to begin with. The gross state product of South Dakota, I looked it up for 2011, was right at $40 billion. How much of the gross state product accrues to agriculture in your own state? What part of the economy are you? Any guesses? I'll give you a hint. It's much larger than it used to be. You're right at 11%. And if it wasn't for FIRE again, F-I-R-E, finance, insurance, and real estate, you would be the largest segment of your economy. It's just slightly larger, about $1 billion larger. South Dakota, and this is why this number is important. When you start talking with other states, dealing with other producers, talking with other industries, or talking with industries that do business elsewhere, South Dakota is considerably ahead of any other state when it comes to the percentage of gross state product that agriculture claims. For Illinois, it is only in the last 2 years that we crawled above 1%. Illinois, our gross state product's around $670 billion, and agriculture just made it over to about $7 billion, so we're over the 1%. Most of the time it had been right at 0.5%. And yet, if you fly over Illinois, what is it? It's covered with farms. People fly over the Midwest, especially the Corn Belt, and they look down and they say, this place, it's all about farms. We say that when we fly over it. You know, it's just miles and miles and nothing but farm, then it's a little town, then a city or something like that. But really, we're the wallpaper for everybody's, we're the screensaver for America. That's what's on the background, lots of farms. And so you fly over Illinois and you say, this state is about farms. And if you aren't careful, you start making decisions based on something that's not even faintly true. Illinois is not about farms, it's about manufacturing and, again, finance. Here's another interesting one. I don't think Ambassador Siddiqui is here, but many people can come close about talking about ag exports. Ag exports, anybody want to make a guess what our ag exports were? Set a new record last year? Any wild guesses? Go ahead, smart guy. Aha, got him. I'll give you a hint. I'm going to give you the answer first, and then we'll get to the question. It's around $140 billion. Here's the question. What are total exports for the United States? I've been asking this question for 20 years at farm meetings. Nobody has ever been faintly close. They don't have a clue. The only number we ever see are our exports. You're going $140 billion. That's amazing. That's a huge number. I'd like to have $140 billion. Yes, we would. But what does that mean? Put it in context. Please, next one. Here it is. It's generally about 10%. Our exports somewhere around $1.5 trillion, give or take. I apologize. I seem to have whacked off the dates, but I think the last one on there is 2010. That's not a particularly new chart, but it would look pretty much the same. Now, agriculture is significant, but people, you need to remember what we really export is manufactured stuff, and it's mostly cars to Canada. You know, that counts as an export. We can't just annex Canada, although I thought that would be a good idea. My theory was we'd taken half the people, well, not even that, take 5,000 Marines, send them across the line in Saskatchewan, solve our energy problem, solve the potash problem, right? We'd have a decent price on potash. Life would be a lot easier. You know, the Canadians, probably the rifle wouldn't be there, so they could just invade and take the place over. They'd probably offer you a beer, and things would be great. We'd get along fine. But no, we had to go to Afghanistan that doesn't have one natural resource worth capturing there. Nonetheless, 70% of this trade occurs across our two borders. We lose track of that. We need to start thinking more about North America. Not in the European Union sense, but just in the sense that this is how we make money. These are the people that work with us and create our economy. And while we are an important part, we are part of a greater whole that has real importance. Okay, and the other thing you ought to check from time to time, please, is go to census.gov. Now, this is not atypical. This shows states that are counties that are winning and losing, not winning and losing, gaining and losing. Population, Illinois looks pretty much the same. Only Illinois, you have almost no blue and almost all yellow and tan. The collar counties, well, we've got 12 million people in Illinois, 10 of them are up in the northeast corner. And it's getting worse. What we have are a half a dozen smaller cities that are just sucking the oxygen out. And if you have a government installation in healthcare, in other words, a university and hospitals, you're going to live, and if not, you're going to die. Now, this has been a source of anguish in the ag community for some time. But if you have been following real numbers for some time, it dawns on you, we've tried a million things, and this trend hasn't changed. We'd better understand that we probably can't change it. And so we need to develop strategies that help us live with it. Perhaps even Illinois is going to look like Australia. I have no idea. Finally, we need to use models, next one please, that fit the reality. This is, all you math majors, raise your hand. There's another problem. Well, we need more math majors. By the way, if you have a son or daughter going to college, and they say, well, I want to be a math major, instead of going, oh, kid, don't do that. We want you to get a job, because it used to be math majors did what? They became math teachers. Well, math majors are hot now. Now, they're not as sexy as engineers, which is a pretty low standard, but nonetheless, if you can manipulate statistics, you're a leg ahead of 90% of your competition. I still say that if we wanted to help young people getting into agriculture, we would require ag curricula to include Stats and Prob 101 and 102. Your life is going to be one long string of data sent to you in the form of probabilities and tables and data, and if you don't have the rudimentary tools, you're going to make some fundamental flaws. Here's an example. This is a standard distribution. This is the darts throwing at the dartboard, and it's called the normal distribution. It means that you have If you randomly do something, flip a coin, you're going to have or roll a dice. It's going to work out to where you have a rare events way out here and rare events on this end, and then most of everything is right in the middle. This is the height of people in this room. If we took had everybody write their height down, we would end up with something that looked like that. The problem we're running into, would you press the button, please, is that we're finding more and more distributions or more and more chunks of data that this is not how it works. Imagine, if you will, that you're a uniform maker, and we're getting ready for the Olympics, and they come to you and say, we want you to make Olympic uniforms, and here's what they look like, and you want to make them for 100 athletes. And he says, okay, I can do that. And so you sit down there and you say, okay, we know that people come in different sizes, so we'll make a lot of them medium, we'll make some larges and smalls, and we'll make some extra smalls and extra larges on the edges here. And then they bring in the 100 athletes. It's the basketball team and the gymnastics team, right? Nobody's got anything that fits. It's just pathetic. This is what's happening to us economically, especially in agriculture. We know, now this is just really not important, but it's just the shape of the graph. We know that income and output is piling up into the hands of a very few, very large operations. So if we design ag policy to fit some normal distribution, will it fit the reality? No. And it doesn't help when the Department of Ag feels compelled to define a farmer as somebody who has 2 horses. Do you realize that was the last time the number of farmers increased in the last couple decades or so? Somewhere around in the 90s. They said, wait, if you got 2 horses, you're a farmer. And all of a sudden we had 2 million more farmers, or 1.5 million or something like that. Because I always wondered what that blip in the data was. Where'd that come from? I said, well, just a little footnote in there. But when you define $1,000 of gross income, you end up with a large number of farmers when we know there are a few 100,000 of producers, especially in given industries. In the sugar beet industry or the sugar industry, you're talking about literally dozens of producers that produce the vast bulk. So trying to design a policy, this is why it's really hard. We're using the wrong tools and looking at the wrong pictures. Okay, next one, please. When we're designing a policy, we've also found something else out. It's really hard to come up with a solution that's going to, we're going to gather all this data and sit down and make a team. We're going to put together a task force, and 2 years later they're going to churn out a solution to this problem. What is it? Everything's changed in 2 years. And so we end up with a very good strategy. Well, we're going to go through a strategy, and we'll call it ready, aim, fire. This is how you do it. You get the data, you analyze the data, and then you execute a plan. Well, what we find out is you end up, instead of going ready, aim, fire, it turns into ready, aim, 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 because the target is moving so fast and evolving. Jim Manzi has a great book. All these resources will be available to you at the end, that just came out. He's a conservative economist that I have a great deal of respect for, and wrote about what we're seeing work are people who just take some trial and error. On our farms, everywhere, we're finding out that the way to deal with complexity is to do it incrementally, is to take a chance, see, and get some data coming back in. If you would hit the next one, please. All right. There is a backlash, and I think we're starting to see it accumulate in the same way it did for health reform to the Farm Bill. As people read through 1,100 pages, not every sentence is going to strike them as a really, really good idea. And newer eyes will look at that and say, wait, here are some implications nobody thought of. In something that large, there are tons of unintended consequences. Consequently, the bigger the package of policy change we try to enact, the more pushback we get, because the more likely it will be to cause changes unfavorable to certain people. And we're getting very, very good at ferreting those out. Consequently, anything other than incremental change has become very hard. This is not a good thing, necessarily, especially not if you want to make a fundamental change like we're talking about in agriculture, about how we're going to change farm payments. But it does tell you something about what will work and what won't. trial and error, as antique sounding as it is, appears to be the only strategy we have right now in business that can match the pace of the advance of complexity. It appears, now it requires, and this is why your son or daughter wanting to be a math major is no longer a bad thing. People are saying we need somebody on staff to create a system whereby we can remember what we did, what happened, and analyze it. We have to be able to crunch the data that we generate, because the most valuable thing you get when you try trial and error is you find out what doesn't work. You make mistakes. If your failure rate is not running 30, 40%, folks, you're not keeping up. Google tries to push a failure rate of somewhere around 70 to 80%. All the projects, that's how you find out, that's how you make progress. You keep throwing stuff at the wall. And that appears to be, that's kind of, Aaron and I are trying to take this kind of strategy on our farm to deal with the problems that we're seeing too, and I've noticed other farmers are adopting it as well. Here's the tricky part though. Incrementalism, because you're not going to take a big leap and get to your goal all at once, means that every year, every day, you're going to have to recommit yourself to that goal or that future that you planned on. The most encouraging thing I heard yesterday at the conclusion of the meeting was the young woman who got up and spoke about, all right, some things worked out this year, some things didn't, doesn't matter. We're moving ahead next year. This is exactly how you do this. You come together next year, you see what didn't happen, see what did happen, and you move on from there. And that's what I was just so encouraged by what I saw. You reordered priorities. You know, priorities just jumped up immensely on that final report. I was stunned by that. This is people saying, well, we know some things that don't work. We do know a handful of things that do work, know a bunch of things that don't work. Let's reshuffle the cards and go on from there. This is incrementalism at its best, but it also shows a commitment to, we're going to keep beating this thing to death until it's finally dead. And then we'll take on the next problem. This is something that we're not particularly adept at. But trust me, the competition is. In 2005, I was fortunate to be named the Writer of the Year. And the good people at Syngenta give all the award winners for the various associations, professional associations, a trip to their headquarters in Basel, Switzerland. And I'm kidding you, it was just a first-class trip. I've never been in places that nice in my life. They really did a nice job. But there were 8 of us. There was the Farm Broadcaster of the Year. I was the Farm Writer of the Year. There was the Farm Editor of the Year. There was the Phytopathologist of the Year. I bet their convention's a really wild one, but nonetheless. You know, I say that. I've got a friend who is an undertaker, and I thought, boy, that has to be, no, those guys are bad news when they're in town. If you've never been to an undertaker's convention, that's well worth it. They let their hair down when they get out of town. But I digress. Nonetheless, they're a phytopathologist, entomologist of the year. So we're all on this bus, and we're driving through Switzerland, which for a guy from Illinois, there's a county in Illinois where the total differential in altitude is 22 feet. You know, it's flat. I mean, it's flat. And so for me to drive through, it was white knuckles. Those people are out of their minds there. They're living on this, they're living at an 80-degree angle. It's just frightening. But so I'm driving around, but nonetheless, I got to know these guys. You've got plenty of time to talk. All of them wonderful men and women. But the phytopathologist was an Indian immigrant who is at UC Davis. And we got to telling our backstory and, you know, here's my family and everything. And he told me a story that I just still could sit and listen or hear in my mind that I was aghast. He said when he was 8 years old, his father and his uncle, the 2 relatives, they lived in a poor farming village in northern India, brought their 10 children in, and they set them down. He was the 3rd eldest of the 10 cousins. And they said, here's the deal. I think if we pool every resource these families can generate, we can send one of you to school. And that was the decision. And he said, it's going to be Krishna. And he didn't know about it. He wasn't the oldest. He wasn't, but they said, he appears to be the best chance we have. And then he used a phrase that still chokes me up. He said, we're going to save all the nectar to make one butterfly. And so they did. They spent every dime they could raise. They stayed in subsistence farming in order to send him to college, and he worked literally like a dog. And he finally, after 3 tries, he had a fellowship waiting for him at UC Davis, and he was able to finally get to the United States, showed up here with $10 in his pocket. And from that beginning, he became the best phytopathologist in America. And he's widely recognized as a string of citations. He talks about how his spending money were postal orders, money orders, from his cousins, 7, 8, 9-year-old cousins, who would earn pennies on the street and send him $20 or $30. The bargain for him was clear. When he left for America, he said, here's the deal. We have done this. We have raised you up. You must raise up 4 of the next generation. He says, we're on number 17, who will finish high school and head into college next year. And he said, with any luck, we'll get all 23 of the next generation. So he said, people ask me, why do I live in the worst part of Oakland, or worst part of Davis, and drive such an old car? He said, that's the reason. That's the reason. Aside from a tremendously touching story about sacrifice, it was horrifying for me to think, all right, this is a farmer in northern India. This is the commitment he will make for his farm, for his industry, for his family. How am I going to compete with that? I have trouble going down to a car that won't tell me the temperature. You done that? You gotten in a car, going to drive a new pickup. Oh, here's one, good price, but wait, doesn't tell the temperature. What's the point in the transportation that doesn't tell you what the temperature is? I'm not really ready. I'm not really in tune with sacrifice, but trust me, people, your competition around the world is. The best part of that whole story, first off, we were all 7 mouths sitting around him had dropped to the ground. And more than a few of us had a couple, especially our fathers or grandfathers, had a struggle and keep the tears out of our eyes. That's a tremendously moving story, and it was literally the truth. It was just stunning. But then he got to talking, and his wife was a pediatrician, and that's one reason they'd been quite successful. She worked very well. He said, what does she think about this whole theory? I said, well, when I got to UC Davis, I finally, took me a long time, didn't know anybody. So after about a year, I'd made a good friend who was an entomologist in a different department, and he also was a grad student from India. And he said, we became good friends after about 2 years. He said, he came to me one time, he said, I have a sister, a couple years younger than you. She would make a great wife for you. And Christian said, okay. And we all went, what? He said, okay. 2 weeks later, he flew to India and got married. Well, this, on top of that other story, this was a little bit much. And so the guys were going, are you out of your teeny tiny mind? And he kind of smiled. He'd obviously heard this from colleagues here in the United States. He says, no. He said, but stop and think about it. This was the very best friend I had in the world, and I was his very best friend. This was his sister. These were 2 people in this world that he loved more than anything. Why would he not want the very best? What possible motive other than our mutual happiness could he possibly have? But nonetheless, to have that level of trust allowed him to find something that probably would have been impossible to do. And they were very happy. And if you take a look at the statistics, engineer talking here, just about the same. Arranged marriages in our system, whatever you want to call it, turn out about the same quality of product. So it's tough to say whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but it also indicates something else they've got going for them, the competition. They have a foundation of trust between each other that allows them levels of efficiency that this engineer can only admire. We need to rebuild trust. Next one, please. And now, the next one. Here's some of the problem. This takes a look at various institutions in the United States and the levels of trust. And overall, there's another chart that I don't include, and you can see almost in all instances it goes, as you read downward, you're going through 3 years, and it's constantly dropping, the level of trust. And they're abysmally low for some institutions that should be trusted a little bit more. By the way, the trust and esteem measurements for agriculture, I was unable to find a very good or up-to-date statistics, but this is about 4 years old. Farmers are ranked in professional esteem slightly below teachers, which is very high. Teachers have always come out at the top of that category and way, way above a whole bunch of other things. But the bigger problem here is that if you look at the general level of trust in our entire culture, economy, country, we have slipped below the same levels, or we have slipped below the commensurate levels that you would find in Russia, one of the most corrupt systems in the world, and yet they now have a higher level of trust in basic institutions than we do. Not much higher, because it's still in the 20 or 30%, but not much lower either. This is not good. How do you make policy when the people you sit down in that room with, you don't trust them? It's really hard. It's really hard. But here's the big part. I just finished a book by Jonathan Haidt. He's a psychologist who has been writing brilliant work. He's a political psychologist, of all things, and mixes political science, but does extensive and detailed and very accurate scientific polling on moral issues. If you would. We're in the middle of a moral value competition. I was going to say conflict. I think that's a little bit strong. Competition, still not right. I can't quite find the right noun there. But we are in trying to think about, when we say, okay, we're going to talk about basic American values or family values or something, or blank type of values, there's this belief that we all share the same values. And the more we investigate how we make these decisions, the more we understand we don't share the same values. At least we don't base these moral judgments on the same weighted type of values. He has come up with what's called moral foundation theory, and there's a great website you can go to find out what your moral foundations are, if you would do the next one. And this is terrible, terribly hard to read. Let me kind of walk you through it. What you're looking at the top is really the moral foundations for the weighting they use if you're liberal. In the middle is a social conservative, and at the bottom it's a libertarian. And if you read from left to right, the basis, the foundation blocks, as he calls them, you make judgments based on caregiving. In other words, are we going to take care of everybody? And this, if you're liberal, of course, this is huge. This is where the term bleeding heart liberal comes from. Their hearts bleed for people, for victims. Okay. We also, on fairness, are we treating people fairly? Liberty and oppression. We tend to favor, liberals, of course, hate to see a lot of regulation. However, they're much less concerned about sanctity. The important one there is loyalty. The reasons that Democrats, and I say this generically, that he talks about, always seem disorganized, is they do not have the same quality or the same reverence or the same value weighting for loyalty. And so if you take a look at social conservatives, they pretty much weight everything the same. In other words, if you're having to make a decision, sanctity, which would be like somebody spitting on the flag. That irritates them and causes them to make decisions a lot more intensely than it would either of them. And of course, at the bottom, the libertarians, they care about one thing. And I think it's fair to say that libertarians are liberals who don't have a heart, and that's pretty much what you get down to. No, for them, it's all about personal liberty. And I think you've seen that. Ron Paul has done an excellent job of pointing out people should be allowed to do what they want to do within very, very narrow, constraints. Now, why do I do this? What he has discovered in this research, and it's ongoing and I think wonderfully valid, is that social conservatives tend to have a significant advantage. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, and it's going to weigh out when it comes to ag policy. And here's where it gets funky. Ag policy in the United States is based on which one of these moral foundations? It turns out it's pretty much a care for victims, right? They send us checks because we can't quite cope with reality, just like people unemployed. Now, we don't want to call it welfare, but it has nothing to do with fairness, right? Don't send any checks to the poor guys. It's not about fairness. It's not about sanctity, although I think that may be coming into that. The family farm, that image we found out can generate money from Washington, and so we keep that because that's one of the images that we hold in a sort of sacred nature. That's really important to Americans, and we can always trot that out and cash it in. And I don't know how many more times we can cash it in, but we're doing that. But while farmers, as a rule, will find themselves more closely aligned to the middle group of people, social conservatives, their entire policy that they have to defend is based on what? A liberal moral foundation. It's based on the fact that we are victims of some sort of economic oppression. Now, that sounds a little bit strong, but nonetheless, we have to deal, and what you generally hear is, oh, we have to deal with weather and markets. Well, a lot of people deal with weather and markets, folks. Here's the big news. But nonetheless, we got a real problem here in formulating ag policy. Next one, if you would, please. I apologize for the size on that. What we're seeing happen, and there's real debate in the political science and the sociological community about this, is we think we're starting to naturally select for groups. And it would appear that social conservatives, their groups are more capable because they have a stronger loyalty, they have a stronger sanctity basis. They seem to be more successful in competing for adherence and also to get their agenda pushed along. What's crucial about this whole premise is that while we think we are going to make rational decisions about things, let's look at the numbers, and then we'll come out and come up with a decision. That's not how we do things. There are very clear evidence now from very good research that's been replicated in many different ways that we make decisions, then we go out and find the data that verify those decisions. This is called motivated reasoning. In other words, our reasoning process will be, well, first off, we make a moral decision based on those bases that we have, what's really important to us. A lot of times people say, well, I don't know. They say, well, this is what's right. And you say, why is it right? They say, well, I don't know. It just feels right. That's when you're making a decision based on those moral foundations. Jonathan Haidt does a wonderful job in his book explaining this. But what is very clear is that we can have people, we can mess with people in these surveys by telling them this is a Democrat or a Republican policy proposal and put something straight out of a Republican platform, and they will come up with very cogent arguments why they're for or against it based on where they are, because they can arrange their reasoning to fit their moral judgment. We've got to get over the idea that we're going to make dispassionate, rational choices. We aren't. We're going to make morally motivated choices. What are we doing? Got to get going. Here's one that I found both encouraging and discouraging. This is a recent poll, and it's been taken before the big heat wave this summer, but nonetheless, It's the people who believe there's solid evidence of climate change. And as a person who has talked about this and support the climatology community on this, I thought, I was heartened. I said, all right, we'd just been dropping off. People just, nah, who cares? But if you think, all right, finally, after all this argument and after all this information and the way we've been talking about it and trying to explain it, and I've been listening to climatologists talk to farmers and just get slapped around in the Q&A period, but nonetheless you think, all right, these guys are finally having some impact. Not at all. Why is it people are changing their mind? Look at the chart at the bottom. It's not scientific research. That has less impact than ever. Why are we thinking that global warming, maybe the climatologists are right? It's hot. No, I'm not kidding you. By the time we get done with this drought, that number should be up around 80%. We're not going to make a decision based on the interesting point about climate change. I have talked about it and gotten, I take my lumps with everybody else on the show and everything when I mention it in a group of farmers, and yet the scientific consensus about the safety of GMOs is much lower than the scientific consensus on anthropogenic global warming, which is at 98% and has been for the last 6 years among climatologists. Among biologists and biological workers, it's in the 60s about whether GMOs are safe. But how do we arrange our thinking? Well, the world needs to accept GMOs, right? But I reserve the right to say that climate change is a hoax. Are we making these decisions based on hard evidence? No, we're making them based on those moral foundations we had. Why are we being impacted by, next one please. Okay, remember the last thing I talked about, why policy is hard? It's because the world impacts us. The world impacts us, how are we doing here? Because we have more black swans. Black swans are completely unpredictable, highly improbable events with disproportionate consequences. It impacts us more because the world has noticed the stark contrast between what's happening in agriculture and what's happening in virtually every other industry. That's a chart of farm income and farm household income, and the other chart is a chart of everybody else's income. Ours has done pretty dang well, while the rest of the world hasn't. This has not gone unnoticed. And it also has to do with the immense amount of wealth that we still have yet to come to grips with. Let's talk about black swans, if you would. Black swans, here's some, to give you an idea of what a black swan event, 9/11 was a clear black swan event. Lehman Brothers, you talk about something that absolutely nobody saw coming and disproportionate consequences. If you have tried to borrow money or you've just written a new operating loan, because of Lehman Brothers, you're filling out 3 forms that you didn't have to fill out before. Have you noticed? There used to be, 2 or something like that? Their copy and your copy. Sheet of paper, sign your name. Maybe you have your wife sign your name. I went in to my banker and we got done doing the operating note and she said, okay, and we went through about 18 sheets of paper. And I'm signing away. Now this last one says that you've signed all the other ones. I said, what? She says, no, I'm not making this up. I said, this last one says that this is the entire agreement, you signed them all, and this is the bottom of the bottomest line. I'm going, fair enough. That was Lehman Brothers. Okay, that's what happened. Disproportionate consequences. You can, if you've flown on a plane, you have a clear idea of what disproportionate consequences are, even for a tragedy of that scope. The euro, nobody was talking about the euro collapsing 2 years ago. There were hints about it, but no. Matter of fact, money was flowing into euros. This one gets me, especially for us sitting in the Midwest. We maybe we're right on the edge of a shale play, but probably not. It'll be south of us. Nonetheless, nobody said natural gas is going to go to $1.70. Nobody was telling you that North Dakota last month would replace Alaska as our number 2 oil producer. Think about it. All that arguments about doing drilling in Anwar, you think that's a dead issue? Oh, you betcha. Why do that when you can go into Illinois, which is the number 4 producer, interestingly enough, of oil, and start fracking, and the lease hounds are all over it. It's a common phenomenon now in the Midwest. Nobody talked about that. And I used to say this is a black swan that could be circling about the land. Aaron and I have decided this black swan has landed. Nobody told me that we were going to have the kind of weather we would be having, or the climate change that we see in my part of the world. Here's some wild guesses where black swans could come from in the future. I mean, they're unpredictable, so this is just places that I'm watching. If you're not keeping an eye on Africa, especially Eastern Africa, you don't know where the competition for farmland really is. If you're not watching what's happening in Morocco, in their political situation, you don't understand how phosphates are going to be priced. Morocco is one big phosphate mine. You need to take a look at what's going to, and I have no idea how this is going to work, and the young people in the blue jackets will have a better idea. We don't know what it is to raise a generation that is joined at the cell phone. And I call this the Borg effect. These kids blank stares. They have never watched Star Trek Voyager or Star Trek Next Generation and seen what a Borg is, but it was a cybernetic race of half people, half android, and they were all connected in one hive mind. And they could hear everybody else's thoughts. Aaron, my son's 37. He's on the combine, and of course, on any tractor now you have, or any large piece of equipment, you've got 7 or 8 minutes between hands when you don't have anything to do. Right? Hit the steering button, and you check your email, and you're texting. So Aaron's texting a guy, well, actually, 5 or 6 guys in Minnesota, and Ohio, and 2 in Iowa, and a couple, 3 around Illinois. Hey, I'm planting, this is Pioneer Umpty Squat number, and it's doing really well, except in the low areas, and they're sending back, oh, yeah, we had that, but up on the hills it really sucks, that sort of thing. Back and forth, and did you see the latest adventure, or did you see the latest episode of Battlestar Galactica? That kind of stuff. We don't know what happens when people have access to that degree and that level of intercommunication. We're starting to get a hint about what it means to have information disseminated at that level. I heard a lot of talk about social media. Quite frankly, while I blog, I haven't waded into Facebook or Twitter, so I don't pretend to this. But I do know this. It's reshaping how we formulate and make up our mind. Because the one way that you change your position or you move from one of those moral foundation charts to the other is by talking to someone else. There's someone you admire who is on a different page of the moral foundations chart. And you talk to him, you say, well, I've always felt this way about that, and here's what I think. I can't really give you good reason. If it's someone you admire, it has a powerful ability. In fact, the only way that you change someone's position on an issue anymore is not going to be with hard data. It's going to be by talking to them because of a personal connection. Next one. Here's what happens after black swan events. You develop an insatiable craving for insurance. It's not an accident that our new farm bill is what? Insurance-based. After you've had 9/11, after you've had a drought, think about, I've never bought crop insurance in my life. I know that sounds shocking, but in my part of the world, the worst crop I've ever had is about 2/3 of a crop. It simply didn't pay. And there are about 40, 50% of the people in my part of the world that do on our kind of ground. It's just the way it's set up. And the fact that we grow specialty corn makes it even worse. But I think we're going to think seriously about it after this year. I'm sitting there going, shoot, the one time, 38 years of farming, I suppose I've kept all those premiums, bought land with it, bid up cash rents, fair is fair. I'm not whining about it. But nonetheless, the hunger for insurance is very real. People are looking for ways to offset risks that they now see as huge and unpredictable and something they can't defend themselves with. We become profit seekers. I love to go. We do market seminars. We come out and guys, and it's like you date these guys. If you're a Jerry Golke client, then it's like you're going steady with him. And people argue, and they have the points of view, and it's, well, Bob said this, and Jerry said that, but, Peter said this, and over there. And then you'll date them for 4 or 5 years until you've lost your margin account, and then you say, oh, obviously need a new guy. It's kind of like shopping for a new church. You're just looking for a pastor who's going to let you do what you want to do, right? Thank you, honest people out there in the congregation. But what we have done now is in uncertain times, after a black swan event, what we want to hear is a clear call, a person stand up here and say, I can tell you what's going to happen, and it's going to be this, this, and this. The fact that he probably, well, we know he can't tell what's going to happen. Predicting ability has gotten worse over the last 10 years in every category, economic, political, social. We simply cannot predict anything, which I also think is partly due to the Borg effect. It's out of control. But nonetheless, we continue to seek out those voices who appear, for the moment, to know what the future is going to hold. And so the rule is, if you're in the business of advising and giving advice about the future, if you ever predict often, do not give dates, but give a lot of predictions, and if you ever hit it wasn't right, never let go of it. Nouriel Roubini has made a career out of calling the 2000, that's Dr. Doom. He's made a television career out of that one call. He has been incredibly wrong at a kind of an 80-90% level since then. But nonetheless, Dr. Doom will get an audience because he was right once. Okay? So if you want to get in that business, start making a bunch of predictions that you can pull up and say, yep, I called that one. I've got my list, and if any of them ever come true, you're going to hear about it. We have a huge herd instinct. Never underestimate what your peers' effect will have on you on your future decisions. Because they're made in a moral foundation climate, what's happening with the rest of the herd really, really matters. Warren Buffett talked about this, and he told a wonderful anecdote at his famous annual meetings. He said, well, let me explain how the herd instinct works. He said there was an oil speculator in New York, and he's sitting at his computer. He's whacking away and making trades in and out, zoom, boom, making money, losing money, making money, losing money, and everything. Has a massive coronary, keels over dead right at his computer. He kind of wakes up, and he's in heaven. He's at the gates of heaven. St. Peter's there, and St. Peter looks at him, and he's kind of leafing through the book there, and he says, well, listen, this is a little embarrassing, and there's no way you could have known this, but here in heaven, we kind of have a quota system, and right now, we're just full of oil speculators. And so I'm sorry, it's just no room here. And he said, wait, give me a minute. And he ran down along the fence, stuck his head in between the bars, and said, hey, they've just discovered oil in hell. About 30 guys go running out the gates. And St. Peter looked at that, and he kind of laughed, and he said, well, fair's fair. We seem to have an opening, so come on in. And the oil speculator looked at St. Peter, and he looked over his shoulder and said, geez, I don't know. There may be some truth to the rumor. If you come out of church and you're standing there talking to your other farmer buddies and they say, yeah, I don't have any old crop. I get rid of my old crop corn this week. The guy said, yeah, I sold mine too. And you're sitting on 40% of yours. Where's your head going to be? Whew. What is it they know that I don't? And by the time the third guy says, oh, I don't have any old crop either, you are panicked. You are placing a market order on your phone right then. Never doubt in uncertain times the power of the herd instinct. Finally, there is a distrust feedback loop. I can tell when you don't trust me, and because of that, I don't trust you. Matter of fact, I'm going to stop trusting you preemptively because you just look like you're shifty, especially you, sir. Don't trust that guy right there. We can tell. Facial recognition and the recognition of what's going on in someone's mind is one of the best, most human skills we have and one of the fastest. We make a decision in 500 milliseconds, half of a second, whether to trust someone or not when we first meet them. And that comes across in micro expressions on our faces. Consequently, unless we get preemptive with our trusting, in other words, we trust even though it may cost us, the good way to do this is say, well, I'm going to trust you on this. Bob, you say you're going to do this, I'm going to trust you on it, I'm going to make my actions based on the fact that I trust you. Unless we start rebuilding that trust, transaction by transaction, person by person, day by day, we will not recapture the kind of trust that will allow us to compete with my friend from India. Next one, please. I talked about ag policy is tough because of wealth. People always say, "Yo, what do you mean? Okay, there are a lot of rich people in the world." No. We have yet to come to grips with the fact that there is an enormous amount of wealth that has nowhere to go. Now, this is a kind of a complicated chart, and the only thing I want you to get out of it is the bars show the number of places that if you are a fund manager, and in your statement of purpose or your bylaws or whatever, it says you can only invest in the highest grade AAA bonds. All right? It's the only place you can put it. Treasury bonds, in other words. That's all you can do. But it used to be European bonds or AAA. There were lots of AAA. There is an enormous amount of money, about $6 trillion, that carries that restriction. And yet, the available supply of stuff that's rated AAA, and this week, Moody's what? Just downgraded Europe. I mean, everybody. They've downgraded all corporate debt. They downgraded the banks. They've downgraded. So you're a fund manager that has $1 billion coming in over your doorstep every day from pension funds, from employee 401ks, and you say, what can I do with this money? Can't put it in the stock market. I'm not allowed to do that. What do you buy? You end up buying T-bills. So if you wonder why interest rates are zero, it's because there is more money than you can possibly imagine. We simply cannot grasp how much liquid wealth there is. But the important thing, hit it one more time, please. This wealth arises because of what everybody is moaning and groaning about, the debt. Our national debt is what? It's all those T-bills, right? There was a period of time, I was talking about this to somebody last night, 15 years ago, in Bill Clinton's presidency, where we were toying around with the idea of paying off the national debt. And economists are going, wait, how would that work? What would this fund manager buy if there were no T-bills, if we had no national debt? And this is the real economic problem that we have. We hate debt, but we love assets, and we ascribe those very same moral attributes to both these. Debt, bad. Assets, good. Wealth is good. What we don't understand is the vast majority of wealth is not stuff and not piles of gold or even fields of farmland. People, it's somebody else's debt. And the people in the banking industry understand this. That's why loan-to-deposit ratios are at historic lows. We don't know how to unwind this. Where will this wealth go? I tend to think it's going to continue to flow into what appear to be safe assets, and one of the few of those remaining, farmland is grossly overpriced because money's got to be somewhere. And if you had to sit there and put away, if you had the problem of trying to invest money right now, you're really staying up nights going, what will I do with it? If I leave it here, I'm actually losing money. I can't make any money. Almost all the bond curve is negative now, so you're paying the government to hold your money. Until we get a handle on how much wealth there is relative to our size, of 1% of that GDP, we're going to continue to be surprised by what happens in our industry. Okay, if we go to the next one. All right. I talked about moral decisions. They're made on care, fairness, freedom, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. These are not hardwired, but they are pre-wired. About 30% of your position on those charts it showed up when you hit the ground, so to speak. And the rest of it is something you've developed. It's important to remember there is right now, for social conservatives, they have a group advantage. Because they have a stronger loyalty, because they touch more moral foundation bases, they also generate higher social capital. Conservative states like South Dakota and North Dakota have very high social capital. You have your good neighbors. You have strong civic institutions. As Robert Putnam demonstrated, you have demonstrably higher self-reported happiness. You think, great, we should all be conservatives. Oh, here's the bummer. I would go along with that except for this. You have abysmally low creativity. There's a good reason why Hollywood's on the left, people. Why writers and artists It's because in order to have that mindset, or there's some linkage in it at least, between coming up with new ideas and being where you are on that chart. Because of that, there are fewer solutions, which pretty much turns out to be a good thing for conservatives. They don't want to change anything anyway. And so they want to keep things the way they are. The problem with that is you get starting into this loop where, all right, we'll hang on to the things that are good and keep moving forward. You don't have much of a failure rate because you don't try new ideas, but you also tend to fall off cliffs. We're going to make a hard and fast rule and stick with it, and we're finding in a very complex world that's not a good decision-making matrix. You also have more victims. And because you don't, I don't mean to put it that way, because social conservatives do not rate care of victims, the CARE Foundation, as highly, you're okay with that. The bill on the farm debate, on the Farm Bill debate, did you notice what the big issue was? Cutting food stamps. This is a strong liberal cause because it's about victims. The problem with that is that too many social security conservatives undergo a moral change of heart when suddenly, through no fault of their own, they slip from the non-victim into the victim category. If you lose your job and you're over 50, you're screwed. That's the best I can say. If you lose your health insurance. Consequently, as long as you're part of the pack and you're doing okay, I can understand. Let's just keep it that way. But because they have more victims, it tends to make their popularity will fade over time. So this is the background, and they've got some huge demographic headwinds. Both the nature of the oncoming generations, they appear to be far more toward the upper chart than they are toward the lower chart. And while that can change over time, it generally doesn't drift very far. Okay, next one, please. There's Arthur Clarke was a noted scientist and science fiction writer, and he developed what's called Clarke's Law. And it's stated essentially this way. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. This is really true. How does your cell phone work? I mean, really, can you explain to me how I get my email on this? No, we don't know. It could be pixie dust in there, right, people? Not a clue. My son works for U.S. Cellular. He is, as he likes to put it, he's the pointy-haired boss. If you read Dilbert, he is the pointy-haired boss, runs herd on a bunch of code monkeys, and that's what he does. He can't explain it to me. He's tried a half a dozen times to find out, well, how's the cell phone work? We don't know. It's magic. Right? How does the car know where to go? How does my combine drive back and forth within half an inch? It's magic. But there's a corollary to this. About 10 years after he came out with this, which I think is very apt and very useful, there's this one. It came out by Professor Gray. Gray's corollary to it is this. Any sufficiently advanced incompetence is indistinguishable from malice. Aside from being a brilliant play on words, it also explains something else. When they have just an inadvertent error in this 1,100-page Farm Bill, that somebody said, it just wasn't thinking right, it got put in the Farm Bill, and then it comes to fruition, it gets passed, and people go, wait, this means that people in Edgar County, my county, because of this bizarre little quirk in there, can't participate in this program. And it's just some, maybe, apostrophe that was missing. You don't know. No matter how trivial, any mistake that you make now in your transactions will be viewed as what? You're trying to screw me. The atmosphere in which we live, because of the lack of trust, because of the complexity, Gray's corollary has come home to live with us. When you make mistakes, first off, don't do that. Especially in routine transactions you do every day, the penalty for mistakes is so high, you cannot allow this. When I speak to organizations like Cargill, said you cannot have mistakes on settlement sheets anymore. Those days are gone. You can't call a guy up and say, look, we're sorry about that one ticket, we didn't get the weight on it right. It doesn't work. He's going to immediately assume what? got something in for me. It's a fight. So first off, make sure you do everyday business exactly right. Raise your standard of performance. But secondly, bear in mind the atmosphere that you're in when you are the victim or the recipient of someone's mistake. Understand that your initial reaction has been conditioned to think the wrong way and to assume the worst. Learn to let some things go. Try that preemptive trust. Okay, let's bring this puppy home. So what? All the stuff I've been blithering on about, here's what I would summarize. Our work with ag policy is not going to get any easier. Because of the moral foundations that we're going to make decisions with, because of the atmosphere, the cultural and economic atmosphere in which we live, we're going to have to do things that used to be easy, comparatively easy 20 years ago, and I've gotten this from people who, in Washington especially, but also in the state houses and, quite frankly, at every level of community and cultural where we're trying to work together. It's really hard. We don't get along. And as a result, things are going to be hard. There's a mistake penalty. There's suddenly a huge disdain for compromise, that you want to win, and you want to win 100%. And so we'll just take this baby until somebody's dead. We'll just battle it until we give up. And it's never settled. The minute the Farm Bill is passed, there'll be a congressman with something to change it. We're never going to let it rest. That's another reason why I believe in incrementalism as opposed to large reform, because it fits right in with this idea you're constantly going to have to reshape policy and reshape hearts and minds. Don't bet your farm on ag policy. Do not expect the answer for your operation, for your industry. If you're in agriculture cannot bet its future on policy. It has to base it on its own actions, what you do for yourself. And if anything, you have to prepare yourself. I don't want you to be adversarial, but Aaron and I are trying to policy-proof ourselves to create an operation that can roll with pretty much any punch we've ever seen possible rolling out of Washington. Stay away from the edges. We've got pretty good data that shows extremely partisan behavior is addictive. If you participated in an Occupy demonstration march or Tea Party, there's a good chance you do that because it does things in your brain that makes you feel good. And we're finding out that that type of behavior becomes more habitual and also makes it very, very difficult for you to either change course or, again, to get back to a compromise. So stay away from the edges. You can have strong opinions, but boy, getting out on the fringe does weird things to your brain. And the beauty of it now is that we can stick in an MRI machine and see it happen. Forge the links every day. Everything that you do, every transaction, every person you talk to, keep your word. It's never been more important. I say, oh, I always do that. No, we don't. I know that too. We fudge, we hedge, we pass along things that we know may or may not be true simply to have something to say. The penalty for that is much higher. The benefits for not doing it have never been greater. Upgrade your own moral conduct to where you are forging, making it easier for other people to trust you and for you to trust other people, that we start the feedback loop going in the right direction. The reason, finally, is very simple. I was flying into Des Moines last summer, flying over 5 bazillion cornfields. And all the way from Chicago, it's only 45 minutes, 50 minutes, something like that, 2 ladies behind me, and they were about my age, grandmothers. You could tell because they'd already been through the grandchildren pictures going back and forth, talking about. And I was listening to their conversation just with one ear, and because they never stopped. I mean, it did not stop. It was nonstop conversation. And as the plane went on and they became more comfortable and they kind of forgot where they are, I think they got to talking about problems and issues and worries that they had. And they were serious worries. They had a grandchild that was sick. They had a son-in-law who couldn't or wouldn't get a job. And, you know, it's the kind of stuff that people my age sit and grieve and stew and fret about. And I felt sorry for them. And then as we came into Des Moines, they'd been going over all these worries that they carried in their heart, not whining, not moaning and groaning, just what I would call womanly grief, quite frankly, and I found it quite touching. Nonetheless, we banked, came into Des Moines. And we're looking down at just, acres, and it was just gorgeous, beautifully green, wonderful. They looked down, and the lady said, look at all those farms. Just look at those fields. Said they're just perfect, aren't they? Now, I wanted to turn around right then and say, look, from 5,000 feet, even my farm looks perfect. And if you haven't ever flown over your farm, you don't understand what a wonderful feeling that is. It erases all the little nastiness around the edges. All you see is, and it did. He said, it just really looks perfect. Then she said something else. She said, those guys are good. Well, they said, yeah, farmers really are. Then there was a long pause, and she said something that both moved me to tears and scared the bejesus out of me. She said to her friend, we're going to be okay. Just from seeing what you do and the way that you do it. You reassure millions of Americans who never have the chance to touch the soil that things are going to be okay. It doesn't matter we're just 1% of the economy, we're 98% of the scenery. We are the screensaver for America. This is not a trivial privilege or a trivial responsibility. When we do what we do, when we talk about our work with hope, when we make plans for a future filled with confidence, when we talk to others in that manner, when we maintain a community that evinces trust and confidence, we undergird, we hold up an awful lot of anxious people. We reassure people on airplanes across America that, as one lady who wrote into U.S. Farm Report said, I just love your program, it's good to see something in America still works. Most of America still works very well. We're just far more visible. Take that responsibility seriously. As much as I've talked about why we have a responsibility to deal with the ag policy problems we have a much larger responsibility to all those in the 99% of the economy and in our culture and in our world. We have to reassure them it still works. Drought, no drought. Floods, no floods. Every year, it's going to require our very best to provide for America that reassurance, and only you can give it to them. Godspeed, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Do we have anybody?
We got Mr. Saporsky here.
Oh, yeah,
Gary's
Mr.
got a
Sikorsky, go ahead.
What do you think about the farm stabilization portion of the Farm Bill, the dairy stabilization portion of the Farm Bill? Easy question.
Yeah. This is going to divide the dairy community, if it hasn't already. I would defer to Jim Dickerell, who of course is the publisher of Dairy Today, and I do not purport to be an expert on dairy policy, but from my vantage point, I think what we're seeing is we have finally reached a level of integration. We now integrate according to product, not according to we're all farmers together. We align ourselves with who buys sells to us and who buys from us. I'm a Cargill grower. Let's just forget about it. It's not they own my body and soul, but I'm very sensitive to what Cargill wants. If you're in the dairy industry, you're very sensitive to the co-op you deal with or the whatever manufacturer. And it appears to me that what's happened in this long, difficult struggle that I've seen convincing arguments both ways, it's a classic. It's going to be decided on a moral foundations basis. And it probably will end up changing or with more people reaching the conclusion that policy isn't the answer. We tried really hard on the dairy portion of the bill. this is a result of an immense amount of effort. I am not optimistic that it will be any more popular a year or any more effective than other dairy policy has been. As a matter of fact, I am somewhat skeptical that it will overcome the natural flaws of supply control that come into play. So consequently, I think what we're going to find out is more and more dairy producers, especially at the level of, say, Fair Oaks Farms or the gigantic dairies, saying, we want an out. No policy is better than the stuff we keep coming up with. We're close to there for grains. There are a lot of large farmers saying, if you just leave me alone, that'd be okay too. But that's about the extent of my dairy. Yes, sir.
You bet. We got a question over here, John.
Yeah, please.
The Farm Bill went through the Senate, and it was pretty much a crop insurance incentive type farm bill for the farmers. It's very evident today, Keith Good wrote that the House is wanting direct payments because the chairman of the Senate Ag Committee from a southern state, and I mean, those two are not even close on that. And they're talking about wanting to take more of the farm bill based on the food stamps, and they're saying now 1 in 7 families are food stamp users. So how does this even come close to getting done?
Okay, 2 rules of thumb you need to remember about any farm bill. Farm bills are barnacles on the freighter of food stamps. The only way you get a farm bill through the House, where the vast majority of guys don't have any farmers. I mean, what's in it for them? And I'm deeply troubled when farm leaders get up and say, look, the farm bill is 80%. Non-farmers, it's not about, but yet if you say, well, would you prefer a standalone farm bill? Good God, no. Because we know what would happen. It's interesting, on that same, did you notice the amendment from Senator Johnson to split the food stamp, SNAP, from the farm bill came really a lot closer than I thought. Can you imagine what would happen if we had a standalone farm bill, just 23 or, $10, $20 billion for farm stuff, and the food stamps were out here? We'd fight. We think we got to fight now. It's nothing like we have. I don't think we have any idea. One reason I haven't invested too much in trying to wade through the 1,100 pages of the Senate bill, I don't think we have any idea what the political climate will require the House to do to that bill. What I do think is, again, because they have so much more, they are strongly influenced by both the Tea Party and Libertarian points of view, that the number's going to be cut down some way or other. They want another 10 to 12 billion, as I understand it, out of it. And you may be more. You take another 10 to 12 billion out of that, and a lot of grain farmers are just going to say, nah. The other issue I think that's got a lot of people concerned in the periphery of our community is the conservation compliance linkage. I'm speaking next month to Feathers Forever, and I've started working on that speech 6 times, going, you just don't know how this baby's going to turn out. That's going to be a biggie if they successfully do that linkage. So consequently, I don't think we have any idea. I am also less optimistic than most people I have read in the farm commentating community about whether it will get done. I don't see the House moving to conference, and if they've got to conference, the inability to compromise on a bill of that magnitude, we can't get the roads bill done. Today they're going to vote on the 10th stopgap roads bill. I mean, that's a slam dunk. Everybody's got roads in every district, and we used to just, we'd vote for those, yeah, and move on. We can't get that done. The idea of a major reform farm bill change. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm trying to give you my best assessment. We're just simply not paying any attention to it. We're worried about the drought because I don't think we really know what it could look like. I think the South has lost its clout, quite frankly. Senator Chambliss notwithstanding, if you can't get it done in the Senate, you're not going to get it done in the House.
Well, on that very, very optimistic note, let's give John a round of applause again.
Thank you.